In 1937, with Britain preparing for conflict, the War Department sent out a specification to all aircraft manufacturers calling for a 4-engined, long-range heavy bomber. Amongst the many contenders, one stood head and shoulders above all the rest. It flew further, faster, and higher than any other, while carrying a greater bomb load: the Avro Lancaster. It would go on to become the RAF's most successful bomber. In May 1945, at the end of the bombing campaign in Europe, the crew of a Lancaster posed in front of their aircraft that had seen them safely through the war. Exactly 70 years later, in May 2015, one of that original crew posed once again in front of the only remaining flying Lancaster in Britain. This is his 70-year journey. James Christian Mortensen was just 15 years old and at school in 1939 when war broke out. A year later he had left to start work, but it was only a stopgap until he was old enough to enlist. On the 14th of June 1943, at the age of 18, he enlisted in the RAF and was designated wireless operator in Bomber Command. His initial training involved learning Morse code, radio procedures, and basic repairs in a classroom, but he quickly progressed to flying and took to the air for the first time just before Christmas in 1943. Initially, the flights were in trainee aircraft, aimed at getting him used to operating the wireless in the air. But in September 1944, he moved to a Vickers Wellington twin-engine bomber. It was also the first time he met Sergeant Ady, who was completing his own training as a bomber pilot. September, October and November training continued, circuits and landings leading to cross-country trips, then practice bombing runs, both daytime and night, then formation flying. Finally, on the 2nd of February 1945, they began conversion onto the Lancaster at RAF Bottisford. Roy Chadwick was the chief aircraft designer at Avro, and he combined an unsuccessful existing bomber, the Manchester, which with 2 engines was hopelessly underpowered and underperforming, with 4 of the newly available Rolls-Royce Merlin engines destined for fame in the Spitfire and the Hurricane. The combination was an instant success right from the maiden flight in January 1941, meeting or exceeding all of its design specifications. The Lancaster could fly over 2,500 miles at 200 miles an hour and 13,000 feet while carrying 20,000 pounds of bombs, dramatically more than the Wellington's 4,000 pound bomb load and the much larger Sterling's 14,000 pound bomb load over just 2,000 miles. It had a 7-man crew consisting pilot, engineer, navigator, wireless operator, bomb aimer and front gunner, middle upper gunner and tail gunner. It came into service in 1942. James completed his conversion course and joined his first operational squadron, number 149, based at RAF Methwold in Lincolnshire, and made his first flight on the 11th of March 1945. A week later, he flew his first operation, a bombing run over Dortmund, followed a few days later by a raid on Munster. In April, he completed 2 night operations over Germany before the crew was sent on a special course of instruction to RAF Feltwell. James still insists it was not because they hadn't hit their target. By the time they returned to operations, the war had changed. Victory had been declared in Europe and the bombing operations ceased. The squadron was put on alert for flying to Japan, but on the 6th of August, the atomic bomb was dropped, ending the war. Life settled down and the missions changed. They flew supplies into Europe, photo reconnaissance over France and Denmark, prisoner repatriation, all while still practicing for the primary purpose, until finally he left RAF Methwold in April 1946. From there he moved to Tuddenham in Suffolk before a final move to RAF Marham. James' RAF career came to an end on the 10th of February 1947. He had completed 500 hours of flying with 117 hours at night. During his service, James was promoted to warrant officer and awarded the 1939 to 1945 Star, the France and Germany Star, and the Victory Medal. In May 2015, James visited RAF Coningsby in Lincolnshire, the home of the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, and was accorded a Hero's Welcome. Unfortunately, it's not possible to get on board Britain's last flying Lancaster, so after several photo calls, he moved on to East Kirby. This is the home of a fully working but non-flying Lancaster, and the airfield has been restored to a working RAF base as it would have been during the war. This Lancaster does allow passengers inside and offers taxi runs up and down the runway, with all 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines roaring away. James, a sprightly 91-year-old, eagerly explored the inside, being heard to mutter, "I don't remember it being this small," and "I'm sure that wasn't there." But once he found his wireless operator's seat, he was completely at home, still remembering the knobs and dials he used last over Germany. The inside tour finished with a seat in the pilot's chair. But a surprise awaited Jim outside. His very first flight, way back in 1943, was in a Domini. And waiting on the runway was that exact aircraft, a Domini. And so again, at 91 years of age, he was once again flying a Domini over a World War II airbase. But the journey does not end there. In 2016, the Ministry of Defence finally acknowledged the heroic effort made by members of the Bomber Command and the sacrifice they paid by issuing a clasp for the 1939 to 1945 Star. And a special mention and thanks go to RAF Woodvale near Southport. The commanding officer, Wing Commander Hooton, and Warrant Officer Neil Blair laid on a special award ceremony to present the clasp to a very surprised James.